I'm really excited to have Brian here. I want to ask first off, how many of you here have ever stayed in an Airbnb? Okay, fair number of you. How many are staying in Airbnb this week as you're here for the summit? So small number of you because we're right at a hotel.
And by the way, thank you for inviting me to a hotel to talk about Airbnb.
Yeah. One of the things that I would love to do in our conversation today is really talk about your vision for Airbnb. I was really struck by Will Lightbourne's comment this morning about moving government from a culture of eligibility to a culture of coverage. Because it highlights a lot of what we're focused on with our government partners and civic activists at Code for America, and that is, how do we actually make things work? And the fundamental challenge of cities is to be a welcoming environment for the people who live there, one that nurtures them and makes the city work. And that's what everybody really cares about. And it's not a culture of coverage, it's a culture of growth and innovation. And Airbnb seems to me to be a wonderful new actor in that discussion. And in so many of the discussions about these new actors like Airbnb, or on the transportation side, Lyft and Uber, are about eligibility, permission, the rules, and not enough about wow, what does this make possible? So I'd love just to kick it over to you, Brian, and have you talk about why you're doing this and what your vision is for Airbnb, and then we'll take it from there and see what issues we may want.
Well, I think there's two things here. One is, how can we work with governments? And two is, well, why do I do what I do? The first thing is, I sometimes read about the sharing economy, or whatever you want to call it, and as if it's like a problem. And sometimes there's this problem, we've got to deal with it. And I think that's the wrong frame. I think there are problems in the United States. I think one problem is 10 years ago, 12 years ago, the average middle-class family made $56,000 a year. Now they make $52,000. So I think it's no question people are worse off today than they were about a decade ago. But I actually think there's a lot of opportunities. I think that the sharing economy allows somebody in 60 seconds to become an entrepreneur, to make a new income. And we've done a bunch of economic studies that showed that it's the equivalent of a 14% raise. So somebody can make an extra $8,000 a year by sharing their home. It actually could be the difference between somebody being in the middle class or not in the middle class. And so, 52% of our hosts depend on Airbnb to pay their rent or their mortgage. I think fundamentally that's a really good thing. But not only that, I think the big thing with us in cities is I think we actually have the same mission. In other words, I don't want the cities to think that we, Airbnb, are coming in against your will and we're going to succeed in spite of you. I actually think you're here to empower your people that live in your cities, and they are our users, and we take a 13% commission. So 87% of the money on Airbnb goes to the same people. So I believe that we can win together, and I think that happens through a partnership. And I do believe the more cities learn about us, and the more we learn about cities, the better our collaboration is. And we've had actually dozens of collaborations in dozens and dozens of cities. With regards to our vision, what we're trying to do, I think it's something perhaps even larger. This summer, we had our peak night. Airbnb started as a way for me and my roommate to be able to pay rent. I couldn't afford to pay rent. This design conference come to San Francisco, and we wanted to create a designer bed and breakfast. I didn't have any beds. My roommate had 3 air beds. We pulled the air beds out of the closet. We called it the air bed and breakfast. I never thought I'd be telling a story today about that, but this August, we had, on a peak night, 1 million people, more than the population of San Francisco, staying in a home around the world in 180 countries. And one of the stories I heard was this host, his name is Sebastian, and he says to me, "Brian, there's this word you never use in your website." And I said, "What's that word?" He said, "The word is friendship." He said, 6 months ago, the London riots, this was a couple years ago, broke out outside my home. And the next day, my mom called me to make sure I was okay. He said, "Here's the interesting thing. Between the time the riots broke out and the time my mom called me was a 24-hour period of time. And in that period of time," he said, 7 of my previous Airbnb guests called me just to make sure I was okay." I wonder how many of these people would have called the hotel, by the way. But the point is that Airbnb is not about spaces. And it's very easy to come to our website and you see a couple million spaces, but it's really more about the people. And our mission is to provide this feeling not of space but belonging. And we belong at home, we belong at our work sometimes, but we want you to be able to belong anywhere in the world in 34,000 cities.
And it's an amazing experience. I have to say, Jen and I had a very personal experience of this when we got married recently in New York. Jen grew up past the cloisters, way on the far north end of Manhattan. Nearest hotel is about 3 miles away. Yet we were able to stay in an Airbnb and walk to our wedding site in Fort Tryon Park. And that's, I think...
Was it a good experience?
Oh, a fabulous experience.
Yeah.
And that's just one of the many affordances when we think differently. When people open their homes, we're actually delivering a service in parts of the city that, are very difficult otherwise. I imagine there's got to be economic impact, not just for the Airbnb hosts, but for local stores, and for other people. Now, again, there's also the possibility of negative impacts, and you guys have been accused, for example, in the media of driving up rents because Airbnb is professionalizing, and maybe you want to address some of that.
Yeah, so we've done a bunch of two questions there. We've done a bunch of economic impact studies. We wanted to know what's the impact of us in cities, and we learned a couple things. The first thing we learned is that the average guest in Airbnb stays in a city almost twice as long. I don't know if
as a hotel guest.
As a hotel. Now, some of the reason is because it's cheaper and therefore they can afford to stay longer. But 40% of travel in the United States, people stay with friends and family.
Yeah.
So probably more than disrupting hotels, that very well could be an activity that we're disrupting, so to speak. And so
or enhancing,
right? But I think the notion that we have to. Not everyone wants to stay with their family. That's a whole other topic, though. There's nothing more than makes you feel like you're a kid again than staying in your old kid's room. But we've done a bunch of impact studies, and one of the things we learned is only 80% of people on Airbnb stay outside of the hotel district. So San Francisco, people in hotels are staying in Union Square. On Airbnb, they're staying in the Mission, they're staying in Hayes Valley, they're staying, in the Dog Patch. In New York, in hotels are staying in Times Square. In Airbnb, we have almost as many people staying in Brooklyn as Manhattan. So it's a completely different thing. And the other thing is we found that the average person visiting New York City, they spend $600 in the local neighborhood, at the local coffee shops, at the local restaurants. They're not going to TGI Fridays. They're going to the local coffee shop. So I think there's a ton of benefits. But you bring up another question, which is everything on Airbnb perfect, and are we amazing? Not everything's perfect. When we started Airbnb, I actually started in a very different place. I believed in the Craig Newmark, he's the founder of Craigslist, and he believed communities should be open, they should be democratic, and they should be self-regulating like immune systems. Right. And I believe that too. I actually don't totally believe that anymore. But at the time, I believe we have a reputation system. If somebody's bad, they're going to get bad reviews, and the system's going to work. But we started realizing that some people were exploiting our platform. And there were some more real estate people in the cities like New York and San Francisco that were buying up apartments. And we didn't even know the extent of this issue. And it really did become an issue. And I think about 18 months ago, we had to remove a couple thousand apartments. But we have not succeeded because of them. I think we've succeeded in spite of them. The vast majority of people on Airbnb are regular people. The last thing somebody wants to do is stay in a property-managed apartment that feels like a hotel. Just go to a hotel. The whole point of Airbnb is you get this feeling of belonging. You get hospitality. You're staying in a real person's home. And so that is the vast majority of what our community is. That's what I want our community to continue to be. And I think that we need to continue to work together with governments to be able to participate with this.
That's certainly my experience. What about one of the other interests of cities, which of course is they collect hotel taxes, and you guys are, seen somehow as sort of skirting around that?
Yeah, one of the questions people had in the early days is maybe this is just successful because it's cheaper, and it's cheaper because people aren't paying taxes. Well, the truth is that the number one reason people are staying at Airbnb is not because they're trying to save money, they're trying to live like a local. Yeah. But that being said, we are actually collecting remitting taxes. Today we announced we're collecting remitting hotel tax in the entire state of Washington. We collect hotel tax in San Francisco, in Portland, in Nashville, in Amsterdam, and in Paris, and there's like a couple dozen cities, and we're in discussions with probably 40 or 50 more cities. So we're moving as fast as possible. It turns out you cannot send a city a briefcase of money. Not that we've tried, but you actually, Like there's this like rush to pay taxes to then meet with the treasury or finance departments to then tell you actually we need to integrate our systems, and then you have this long project. So we're moving as fast as we can, but we want to pay hotel tax because to pay hotel tax is to be legitimized and recognized as a player. And we've done conversion tests, and paying hotel tax does not lower conversion. So we're not losing, our hosts aren't losing, cities are making more money, and there's no problem.
That sounds great. So, in terms of, back to this sort of sense of community, you talked a little bit about people staying in different neighborhoods. You've also talked about people using Airbnb to supplement their income and help pay their rent. I remember back after the 2008 financial crisis, there was a lot of news coming out about how much, Airbnb had basically exploded in places like Portugal and Greece. Are you seeing an uptick in people, needing Airbnb to make ends meet, or has that been pretty consistent through the time you've been operating?
It's been consistent through the entire time. Just to say it one more time, Airbnb, we created the company not because I wanted to be some successful entrepreneur and make a bunch of money. If I was going to do that, I would not have started airbeds for conferences around the country. That was not going to be a good idea. Right. In fact, I had a mentor, I told him about the idea of Airbed and breakfast, and he told me, I hope that's not the only idea you're working on. And my mom, growing up, all she ever wanted, because I went to art school, she said, just make sure you get a job that has health insurance. And so when we created Airbed and breakfast, she said, I guess you never got that job of health insurance. This is what happens. You start having to let strangers in your homes. But the truth is that, we've been, now we are, here's the crazy thing. Now there's a proposition in San Francisco, Proposition F, which is basically, there are some opponents of Airbnb, they're saying we are anti-affordable housing. It is pretty weird because the founding story was to allow people to afford to stay in their homes. 52% of our hosts depend on it to pay their rent or their mortgage. In many cities, they're not building supply fast enough. Rents are rising, and people are hanging on to be able to keep their homes, and they're looking to Airbnb. That is the vast majority of the story, and you can literally just go on the website, read the profiles, read the people, read the stories. The good news is 100% of our homes are available publicly. You can read the stories yourself. And we're seeing this, like in Spain, 50% of the people under 30 are unemployed. And so it's a huge place for us to have a lot of homes. Greece exploded when the economy goes down. So we're pretty counter-cyclical, the country Brazil.
Yeah. Hey, I want to pivot really quickly before we run out of time. You're a designer by background, and design is hugely central to what we do at Code for America. This idea that we actually need to redesign services so that they work for users. Can you kind of maybe tell some of your founding stories about the influence of design on how Airbnb came to be?
Yeah, I mean, it was pretty funny. I
remember the story that Paul Graham tells about sending you back to New York.
Yeah, I think
in particular.
So I went to Rhode Island School of Design. I studied industrial design. Industrial design is like making products. And one of the things you learn in industrial design is it's kind of like method acting. Like you become the character when you're an actor. Industrial designers do the same thing. Like at school I had to do like a project where we did a ventilator for children, and actually that was after school. But you have to become the patient and put yourself in their shoes. And when you do that, you start to design these entire journeys. And when Joe and I started Airbnb, or with Nate, one of the things we did is we literally, and Paul Graham helped influence us to do this. We went to New York and went door to door, meeting every one of our users. We literally lived with our users. When you bought an iPhone, Steve Jobs never came and slept on your couch, but I did. I was you signed for the service, the founder lived with you for a night, and that was kind of the proposition back then. But by living with our customers and living with our hosts, we started observing things. And just to give you one example, in 2009, it was really hard to take a photo and put it on your laptop, upload it to a website. Today, that's very easy. But before the smartphone kind of revolution, that was really hard. And so we had this idea. We said, what if you could just click a button, and a photographer would just magically show up and take photos and would just be uploaded to your site? And the host said, that would be amazing. So I got a camera from one of my friends, and Joe did the same thing. And the next day, I knocked on the person's door. I said, ta-da, we're here. And we literally photographed the homes ourselves. And then the photos were really great. But I think the lesson of design is working backwards from a vision. We believe in a reasonable vision of the way the world could look. And we believe that world can be designed. I mean, I had a teacher at RISD, and he told me, Brian, you're a designer. Everything around you was designed by somebody else, if it's man-made. You can redesign the world you live in. I think so many of us go through life, or not people here, but a lot of people go through life thinking they're living in someone else's world. We enter someone else's world, but we leave our world behind, the world that we've contributed to and designed. And I think this sense that anything can be rethought, anything can be designed, anything around you is just somebody else did that with less information than you have today is an unbelievably empowering idea. And as I think about running Airbnb, I don't try to presume any convention of running a company. Anything could be done a little bit better if you just imagine like where you want to get to.
Well, that's a wonderful place to stop. Because that's a really wonderful vision for all of you to take to rethinking all the fundamental services of government. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks a lot, Brian. That was awesome.